Dalel Benbabaali recently completed a Ph.D. in social geography. Remember, geography is one of those fields that is really keep coming up here. You know, that was once sort of at the end of the list, if I may say, and now really is producing really fine young scholars like Dalel. She completed this PhD in social geography at the University of Paris Ouest-Nanterre. She has taught at the Sorbonne and is currently a postdoc, or she's about ready to start this postdoc. Am I right? Right? In the Department of Anthropology at the very famous London School of Economics. There she will be part of an international research program on inequality and poverty in India. She wrote a dissertation on the Kamma caste of Andhra Pradesh, and this is what she's currently working on and turning a dissertation into a book. And naturally today she's going to be telling us something about this caste, so especially I think in relationship to issues of dominance and territory. So please welcome our guest speaker here today. Join me. Thank you very much, Dalel.
So the title of my talk today is Dominant Caste and Territory in South India, the case of the Kammas of Andhra Pradesh. Since my background is in social geography, I've studied caste from a spatial perspective. The concept of territory, which can be defined as social, economic, and political appropriation of space, is very often absent in the existing literature on caste. My argument is that caste dominance cannot be understood without looking at territorial control. This argument is all the more relevant in the case of Andhra Pradesh, since the demand for a separate Telangana state has very much to do with these questions of caste domination. Traditionally, the Kammas are dominant in coastal Andhra, whereas the Reddis are dominant in the interior regions of Telangana and Rayalaseema. Both these castes have been dominating the politics of Andhra Pradesh since the formation of the state in 1956, and even before that, in fact, because they were at the forefront of the movement for the formation of a linguistic Telugu state. So both these castes are originally farming communities, in Varna terms, Shudras, so their ritual status is relatively low, but they claim that they are Kshatriyas, the traditional warrior Varna, because some of their ancestors were local kings or army commanders under the Vijayanagar Empire. But the reason why they are not commonly perceived as Shudras is because of their upward social mobility in the last century or so, which explains that today they don't benefit from backward caste or OBC reservations, unlike other agrarian castes in North India, like the Kurmis, for example. Both Kammas and Reddis are mostly land-owning communities. The main difference is that Kamma property is concentrated in the agriculturally rich Krishna and Godavari deltas, where land is fertile and irrigated, whereas Reddis own land in the arid areas of the Deccan Plateau, where irrigation is rare. So in terms of assets, Kammas are more prosperous, but in terms of political power, the Reddis have been dominating the state through their control of the Congress party since independence. It's only in the 1980s, with the creation of a regional party called the Telugu Desam Party, the TDP, that the ex-movie star N.T. Ramarao, known as NTR, became the first Kamma chief minister of Andhra Pradesh, followed by his son-in-law Chandrababu Naidu. Kammas have a very high propensity to migrate, like wherever they see new investment opportunities, whether it's new irrigated areas or when they go to the cities, it's for business or real estate. They have also migrated to other South Indian states like Karnataka and Tamil Nadu, and of course abroad, especially in the US. And it's interesting, since we are in Princeton, I should mention that New Jersey has the highest concentration of Kammas in America, along with California. So in the US, they are entrepreneurs or they work in the IT industry, and they are quite dominant in the Telugu community. Like they control the Telugu Association of North America, known as TANA. And the Reddys, in fact, resented this domination, and they created their own organization called American Telugu Association. So this rivalry between the two dominant castes of Andhra Pradesh exists even in the US. So this was just a short introduction to what I'd like to talk about today, which is basically the link between migration and upward social mobility, but also the power mechanisms that prevent the mobility of the caste dominated by Kammas in the territories they control. The aim of my research was to redefine the concept of dominant caste, which was first studied in the 1950s by M.N. Srinivas at the village level. But I wanted to make it relevant in contemporary India by taking into account the rapid urbanization and the increased social and spatial mobility of the elites. According to Srinivas, I quote, "For a caste to be dominant, it should own a sizable amount of the arable land locally available, have strength of numbers, and occupy a high place in the local hierarchy," unquote. So Kammas form only 5% of the population of Andhra Pradesh, but 20% locally in the Krishna Delta, where they own 80% of the agricultural land. So despite their relatively small numbers at the state level, they occupy key positions in the economy and politics of Andhra Pradesh, and to a lesser extent of Tamil Nadu and Karnataka. So taking territory into account is essential to understand the change in the scale and nature of caste dominance, and to study its regional variations. When the Telugu Desam Party won the elections in Andhra Pradesh in 1983, the Kamma control over state power helped them to consolidate their influence. They also dominate the Telugu media and cinema, which gives them socio-cultural preeminence. So these new attributes of dominance, which are not only material but also ideological, have a hegemonic character. However, this hegemony is challenged by the growing resistance of Dalits to caste and class oppression. And Kamma cultural domination has also been contested by the supporters of a separate Telangana state. Now, with the bifurcation of Andhra Pradesh, which has been announced, Kamma's interests are likely to be harmed, especially in Hyderabad. Before trying to examine whether the creation of Telangana will lead to a decline of Kamma dominance, I'd like to go back to the history of this community to trace both their spatial and social trajectories. So Kamma's early history is associated with Buddhism, which was very influential in the Krishna Valley in the 3rd century. According to epigraphical records, the Krishna Delta area at that time was called Kammanadu, and the main farming community who was living there was known as Kamma. But it's only after the 10th century that the name Kamma referred specifically to a Hindu agrarian caste. Most Kammas were small farmers, but some of them worked as soldiers for the Kakatiya kings of Varangal. The Kamma historian K.B. Chowdhury tries to prove the martial origin of his caste based on these matrimonial alliances between Kammas and members of the Kakatiya dynasty, and it's based on his book that Kammas today continue to claim Kshatriya status, though their traditional occupation is agriculture. So during the Vijayanagar Empire, more and more Kammas became soldiers or even army commanders to participate in the conquest of the Tamil country. At that time, war was a major migration factor, and this explains the presence today of a large Kamma community in Tamil Nadu. It's the consequence of military migrations from the 15th century onwards. But in times of peace, the Kamma community, the Kamma settlers, engaged in agricultural activities on the conquered territories of South India. And since they needed manpower to clear the forest lands and service castes to take care of so-called polluting tasks, they brought with them Telugu-speaking untouchable communities, known today in Tamil Nadu as Sakiliyas. Along with this process of military conquest in the south, Kammas also acquired land in the interior regions of the Deccan Plateau. So agricultural colonization was another major factor of migration for the dominant caste, and it led to the dispossession of tribals and small farmers from their lands. So the Telangana region at that time was under the control of Muslim rulers who collected taxes through the members of the dominant caste that were given the title of Chowdhuries. Muslim princes thus played a role in reinforcing caste hierarchy because they saw it as a guarantee of social order among their Hindu subjects. Kamma Chowdhuries used their title to consolidate their holdings in Telangana, while a few became zamindars or big landlords in coastal Andhra. The Nizams of Hyderabad even called Kamma farmers from Andhra to develop agriculture in Telangana, generously granting them titles to land, because Kammas were considered expert rice cultivators due to their experience of irrigation in the deltas. In the mid-19th century, the Britishers had built 2 big dams in coastal Andhra on the Krishna and Godavari rivers. And Kamma farmers benefited tremendously from the agrarian development that followed the introduction of canal irrigation in British-ruled Andhra. Even the middle peasantry that was paying taxes directly under the Rayodvari system became richer thanks to irrigation and the introduction of cash crops like sugarcane, tobacco, and cotton. In a context of generalized commodification of land, the value of their properties increased so much that by selling 1 acre of land in the Krishna Delta, they could buy 10 acres in the dry areas of Telangana. The main crop grown in the fertile deltaic lands was paddy or rice, and it became a commercial crop thanks to the surpluses produced. So the commercialization of agriculture led to a development of transportation infrastructure, urban growth, and industrialization. The small town of Vijayawada became a thriving commercial market and a very important railway junction. Kamma farmers then diversified their activities by migrating to urban areas. While keeping land in their villages, they used their agricultural surplus to invest in bus companies or in food processing industries like rice mills or sugar factories. They also started commercializing their own agricultural production, and they became money lenders, thus bypassing the traditional merchant caste and business communities. This process of capital accumulation by the rich Kamma farmers led to an increased polarization of the agrarian social structure, with the emergence of a class of kulaks within the Andhra peasantry. In spite of this class differentiation, Kammas make conscious efforts to remain united by using caste as a social capital. They created their first caste association in the beginning of the 20th century, and they used the funds to provide scholarship to children from poor Kamma families and to build Kamma hostels in the cities. Education was really seen as a key to social mobility, and even small farmers were eager to send their children out of the village to study in English in the cities. That's what M.N. Srinivas called westernization, as opposed to Sanskritization, which is another way to improve one's status in society by adopting Brahmanical rituals. There was a brief attempt at Sanskritization by Kammas when some of them went to Benares to learn the Vedas and to become priests in order to perform their own weddings. But the rationalist anti-Brahmin movement also had a strong influence on Kammas. Some joined the non-Brahmin Justice Party, which was supported by the middle caste, asking for reservations in the Madras presidency. The Britishers accepted those demands to break the hegemony of Brahmins in the administration because they suspected them of being nationalists. In the 1930s, with the economic depression and the rise in taxes, which was harming farmers' interests, many Kammas shifted from a pro-British position to a nationalist one. The Andhra Communist Party was supported mostly by the Kamma peasantry, who saw in this new party a vehicle for political power, since the Congress Party was already controlled by the Reddys. Some Kammas even took part in the Telangana rebellion against the feudal landlords in the 1940s. 1 year after India got independence, Nehru sent the army to forcibly annex the princely state of Hyderabad to the Indian Union. This led to a massacre affecting mostly Muslim villages. Telangana was later merged with the Andhra province, and Hyderabad became the capital of the new Andhra Pradesh state, the first Indian state to be formed on a linguistic basis. The demand for a Telugu state separated from the Tamil province, in fact, was an old demand by the Telugu-speaking dominant caste. In fact, another reason that could explain why Kamma's support for the Communist Party was so strong post-independence is that the Andhra communists were in favor of Telugu regionalism against the domination of Tamils in the multilingual Madras state. But the formation of linguistic states mostly served the interests of dominant caste, as the Dalit leader Ambedkar noted, I quote him, "In our country, linguism is only another name for communalism. Take Andhra. There are two major communities spread over the linguistic area. They are either the Reddys or the Kammas. They hold all the land, all the offices, all the business. The untouchables live in subordinate dependence on them. In a linguistic state, what would remain for the smaller communities to look to?" Unquote. So after the formation of Andhra Pradesh, the Communist Party lost one of its main electoral arguments and started declining. The Congress won the elections and remained in power in Andhra Pradesh for almost 3 decades, mostly in the hands of the Reddys, even if some Kamma congressmen were also present in the state legislative assembly, where the dominant caste continue to be overrepresented till today. So these territorial recompositions encouraged the migration of Kammas from Andhra to Telangana, especially to Hyderabad. Kamma settlers were educationally more advanced and wealthier than the people of Telangana who had lived under the Nizam rule. So migration from Andhra was perceived as a threat by the locals. In fact, the state's reorganization commission was not in favor of the formation of Andhra Pradesh because of the lack of homogeneity between Telangana and Andhra due to their distinct history and geography. Coastal Andhra is naturally endowed with rich plains of fertile and irrigated lands, whereas agriculture in the arid Deccan Plateau was not so developed. And under the Nizams, Telangana was characterized by feudal relations in agriculture and a very restricted access to modern education. So even the landlords of Telangana were lagging behind the capitalist Kamma farmers in terms of exposure to modernity, and Kamma farmers had benefited, of course, from the British rule. So this uneven development continued after the independence, since most of the new irrigation projects took place in coastal Andhra, where the Green Revolution was introduced in the 1960s. Kammas were the main beneficiaries of the Green Revolution since they had enough capital to invest in the new techniques of production, and they were generally entrepreneurial. So their wealth tremendously increased, and they resented the Land Ceiling Act, which they perceived as a direct attack against their economic power by the Brahmin Chief Minister Narasimha Rao. In fact, land reforms hardly changed the agrarian structure in Andhra Pradesh. The big landlords may have lost some of their property, but the middle peasantry was not really affected because they managed to divide their lands among their family members. And the landless farmers, who mostly belonged to the Dalit caste, hardly benefited from the land reforms. The Green Revolution accelerated the process of economic diversification in the rural areas of coastal Andhra. The rich Kamma farmers were no longer dependent on agriculture. They invested in agro-industries, transportation business, and they were able to send their children for higher education in Hyderabad. They became more and more urban-oriented in search of new avenues of employment. And when they migrated to rural areas, it was mostly to new irrigation projects because they knew that they could buy cheap lands in Telangana or in the neighboring state of Karnataka, and then improve their plots once irrigation was available, and then benefit from land appreciation. Even in cities like Hyderabad, when they bought land, it was often speculative because they were very active in the real estate business. This flow of capital from Andhra to Telangana was not perceived by the local as a positive sign of economic development, but as exploitation of their poorer conditions. Kamma settlers in Telangana claim that they turned the desert green, which is a typical colonist narrative. In fact, they were looking for cheaper land and cheaper manpower. And when land was not available for sale, Kammas were doing what we call reverse tenancy by taking land on lease from poor farmers and lending them money. And when the local farmers were too indebted to their rich Kamma tenants, they had ultimately to yield their lands. In Hyderabad, people coming from Andhra had an advantage to access higher education and employment because they had benefited from English schooling in the region, which was long controlled by the Britishers. So this harsh competition from Andhra migrants led to the first separatist Telangana movement in 1969. But it's only in the 1980s that the number of Kamma settlers in Hyderabad increased significantly. According to some Kamma informants, they felt encouraged to migrate to the capital city after the Telugu Desam Party, the TDP, came to power in 1983. For the first time, a Kamma chief minister, N.T. Ramarao, or NTR, was leading the state, and many of his caste fellows felt that this would open new opportunities for them in the capital city. The victory of the Telugu Desam Party, the TDP, just a few months after its creation, can be explained by the anger of the Telugu people at the constant interference of the Congress central government in choosing Congress chief ministers of Andhra Pradesh. So N.T. Ramarao made his whole campaign on the regionalist theme of Telugu pride, which was really supported by the media, especially the Telugu newspaper Inadu, owned by the Kamma billionaire Ramoji Rao, who owns Inadu, ETV, Ramoji Film City. So the control of the regional media by Kamma businessmen obviously helped NTR to capture state power. His charisma as an ex-movie star and his populist promises like welfare schemes and food subsidies are also important factors behind his victory. And on top of his personal fortune, he benefited from the financial support of big Kamma industrialists who wanted a chief minister from their caste to serve their interests. Before NTR's election as the head of the state, there was a discrepancy between Kamma's economic wealth and their lack of decisive political power because they were sidelined by the Reddys dominating the Congress. NTR's trajectory from an agricultural family to cinema and then politics is typical of Kamma's pattern of social mobility. The Telugu film industry, which is the second in India in terms of numbers of movies released every year, is dominated by Kamma producers, Kamma directors, and actors, with a few exceptions like Chiranjeevi, the Kapu superstar turned politician. Corporate health and education are also major sectors in which Kammas have invested their money. The first generation of Kamma doctors who migrated to the United States in the 1960s accumulated capital abroad and then returned to Hyderabad in the 1980s to invest in private hospitals encouraged by NTR. Apart from medicine, engineering is the most common career option among the Kamma young generation. But since they are not entitled to reservations, they generally study in private colleges mostly owned by Kamma businessmen. And the cost of this educational institution is so high that other communities can hardly afford to study there. So this corporatization of health and education in Andhra Pradesh was started by the Kammas in the 1980s, even before the liberalization process started at the national level after 91. From 1995 to 2004, under the regime of Chandrababu Naidu, NTR's son-in-law, economic reforms and the disengagement of the state accelerated this phenomenon. The TDP Chief Minister Naidu became the darling of the corporate media and the World Bank. He even got a loan from the World Bank to develop Andhra Pradesh. It was the first time that an international institution like the World Bank gave a loan to a subnational entity. Naidu made Hyderabad a showcase for his neoliberal policies. He focused on urban infrastructure and global growth sectors like the information technology. And he decided to develop high-tech city in the western periphery of Hyderabad, near Jubilee Hills and Kukatpalli, where most of the Kamma settlers live. So that led to a tremendous appreciation of their properties. Kamma businessmen who benefited from political patronage and privileged access to information for speculation for real estate could make a lot of profit by investing in those areas near high-tech city. So Chandrababu Naidu was very often accused of corruption, nepotism, and casteism because his development choices benefited so clearly to his own Kamma community. In 1999, a post-electoral survey showed that 87% of Kamma voters re-elected Naidu for a second mandate. It's under Naidu's regime of almost 1 decade that the Kamma caste really became hegemonic in Andhra Pradesh. I borrow here the concept of hegemony from Gramsci, which it refers to a kind of domination which is not only material but also ideological. By migrating to urban areas, Kammas started enjoying new attributes of dominance not based on land ownership alone, but also control over the media, culture, and politics. After seizing state power, they were able to impose on the rest of society the neoliberal ideology that served their capitalist interests best. So this led to a lopsided type of development that increased social and spatial inequalities, affecting poor farmers and rural areas. Between 1997 and 2004, 3,000 farmers committed suicide in Andhra Pradesh, mostly in the less developed regions of Telangana and Rayalaseema. The liberalization of agriculture led to an increase in the costs of production. So even in coastal Andhra, agriculture is not very profitable anymore. But Kammas generally don't sell their land when they migrate to the cities. For them, land is a very important symbol of prestige and power. So they prefer to give it on lease to tenants because they know that the land value is not going to decrease and agricultural incomes are not taxed anyway. So, for example, the land around Vijayawada in the Krishna Delta has appreciated tremendously since the announcement of the Telangana state, because there's a lot of speculation that Vijayawada might become the new capital of Andhra. So even Kammas living abroad are sending remittances back to India for their families to buy land around Vijayawada for speculative investment, not for agriculture. Land is also used as dowry, and Kammas are known in Andhra Pradesh to have the most conspicuous weddings and to give the highest dowries to their daughters, especially in the form of land and gold. So if Kammas have retained their economic power, they have lost some of their political influence after the Congress party came back to power in the 2004 state elections. The formation of Telangana might harm their interests in Hyderabad, but if Vijayawada becomes the new capital of Andhra, it's really a totally Kamma-dominated town. So they might very well repatriate their investments and make them strive there as well. And Kammas may also capture state power in Andhra. So the decline of Kamma dominance is not so much economic or even political, but mostly social and cultural, because of the growing resistance to their cultural hegemony in Telangana and the social contestation of their caste domination by the Dalits, whom they have used as agricultural labor and oppressed for centuries. The Dalit movement in Andhra Pradesh started organizing after a massacre perpetrated by Kamma landlords in 1985 in a village called Karamchedu, which is one of the richest and most developed villages of coastal Andhra. So this goes against the argument that caste atrocities happen only in backward regions. The two main Dalit communities of Karamchedu, the Malas and the Madigas, started benefiting quite early from Christian missionaries' activities and then from the reservation policy. So they started sending their children to school, finding employment outside agriculture, and becoming politically aware. So this is what the Kammas had a problem with. Like Dalit assertion meant that they could no longer control their votes and they could no longer transform their economic dependence into political loyalty. When the Telugu Desam party was created, the Dalits of Karamchedu continued to vote for the Congress against their Kamma employers who supported the TDP. So this Dalit resistance was perceived by the Kamma landlords as a very dangerous sign of rebellion and contestation of their traditional dominance. So they decided to attack them to teach them a lesson, which is the expression they use. So the pretext for retaliation was a small incident in Karamchedu that opposed a Kamma boy to a Madiga lady who scolded him because he was washing his buffalo in the pond which the Dalits used for drinking water. And this was seen as a sufficient provocation for the Kamma landlords to plan a punitive expedition to the Madiga hamlet, burn down the huts, rape 3 women, and beat up the men with axes, leaving many terribly injured and 6 murdered. As a response to this event of extraordinary violence, a strong mobilization led to the creation of the Dalit Mahasabha that soon spread across the entire state. So this organization fought for the culprits to be punished, but NTR, who was then the chief minister, had Kamma relatives in Karamchedu, one of them directly involved in the massacre and whose name was not even included in the list of the 92 accused. 23 years after the killings, only 1 accused was condemned to life imprisonment and 30 others to 3 years in jail. The victims considered that this judgment didn't bring them justice. NTR's relative who escaped from the one who premeditated the massacre and who escaped from the court was later killed by the Naxalites. The People's War Group was the main Naxalite organization in Andhra Pradesh at that time, and they were very active in Telangana. where the struggle took shape along class lines rather than caste. In fact, for the Naxalites, who are Maoist guerrillas, Kammas and Reddys are seen as class enemies more than dominant castes. There is a very strong correlation between caste and class, and it's often difficult to disentangle both. The big landlords and the ruling class of Andhra Pradesh mostly belong to the dominant caste, and they used state power to crush the Naxalite movement, which was threatening their interests. I just want to quote here the human rights activist K. Balagopal. After the Telugu Desam party came to power, the ruthlessness of the repression on Maoists has increased manifold, and its class content is clearly revealed in the exchanges in the state legislative assembly, which is populated by the cream of the absentee landlords, contractors, financiers, and businessmen. Suppression of the rural poor is an important requirement for the strengthening of the hegemony of this class. It is not just that payment of higher wages would affect its accumulation or that the demand for land redistribution would affect its property, it is a political requirement too, end quote. So both under NTR and Chandrababu Naidu's regime, the paramilitary forces killed hundreds of Naxal guerrillas, but also unarmed tribal sympathizers in fake encounters. That's why the Maoists now mostly have moved from Andhra Pradesh to the neighboring state of Chhattisgarh. So it clearly appears that caste dominance has to do with territorial control, and that access to state power is essential to promote specific caste and class interests. That's why the Kammas of Tamil Nadu and Karnataka are not as hegemonic as the Kammas of Andhra Pradesh, because outside the state of origin, they are considered as a Telugu linguistic minority, so they don't have so much political power. But they are locally dominant in some pockets of northern Karnataka, where they have become very rich after migrating to buy lands in the new irrigated belt of the Tungabhadra River. They are also dominant in cities of Tamil Nadu like Coimbatore, where they own most of the textile factories and other industries. I have conducted fieldwork in all these places to compare the nature and level of Kamma dominance depending on the territory observed and how much control they have over it. My methodology was mostly qualitative, based on interviews and ethnographic studies, but I also used a questionnaire to do a survey among a sample of 200 Kamma households, 100 in a village of Krishna Delta called Godavaru, and another 100 in a suburb of Hyderabad known as Kukatpalli. So I could make a quantitative analysis and compare the socio-economic profile of Kammas both in rural and urban areas. I will not go into the details of the result, but the questionnaire was mostly about their migration patterns, educational levels, family structures, professional mobility, socio-economic position, and political participation. Migration was found to be a very important factor of social mobility. Even in rural areas, 20% of Kamma households had a family member abroad sending remittances that improved their economic status. The educational level of Kammas in Hyderabad was obviously higher than in the village, but in rural areas too, Kammas invest a lot in their children's education so that they can move out of agriculture and enter urban professions. Most live in nuclear families and have no more than 2 children to avoid the division of property. Endogamy is strictly respected with a very few exceptions. Subcaste doesn't matter anymore. Kammas belonging to different subcastes don't mind intermarriage. If the socio-economic status of Kammas in Hyderabad is higher in terms of incomes and assets, the Kamma rural elite enjoy a stronger dominance over the backward and Dalit castes. Kamma dominance in urban areas is of a different nature, and to understand what caste dominance means in the cities, I did a comparative study of 2 regional towns, Vijayawada in Andhra Pradesh and Coimbatore in Tamil Nadu. In Vijayawada, Kammas form a class of bourgeois neo-rich who acquired their wealth in a short time by doing all kinds of businesses, including illegal activities. In Coimbatore, Kammas have built their wealth in the textile industry over a long period of time since they first migrated there as cotton farmers. Some belong to old aristocratic families who settled in Tamil Nadu a few centuries ago as army commanders or big landlords. So their culture is totally different from Andhra Kammas, and they rarely intermarry. The Telugu they speak is mixed with Tamil words, and they are much more cultured and well-read, but that doesn't make them any less exploitative of their manpower in the textile factories, where they generally employ lower caste girls who migrate to the mills, sign a 3-year contract, after which they get married by using the small saving they could gather for their dowry. These short contracts are favored by the Kamma bosses to avoid the unionization of their workers, who keep changing and who don't have time to organize. That's how they put an end to the strikes that were very common in Coimbatore textile industry. This extremely wealthy capitalist class in Coimbatore tries to improve its image through philanthropy. They fund hospitals and educational institutions through their trusts, whereas in Vijayawada, both health and education are only a business aimed at making profit, owned by very aggressive Kamma entrepreneurs. In Coimbatore, Kamma dominance is less political than in Vijayawada, where business, caste, and politics are very much intertwined. A violent rivalry opposes Kapu and Kamma politicians in Vijayawada, which led to political murders and riots between Kapu and Kamma's communities. Apart from these two cities, I also conducted fieldwork in the rural areas of Telangana and Karnataka, where Kammas have migrated in search of greener pastures. In Telangana, they were attracted by the Sri Ram Sagar project in Nizamabad district, and in Karnataka, they went for the Tungabhadra project in Bellary and Raichur districts. Kamma farmers claim that they have brought development to those regions by teaching rice cultivation to the locals. But their arrival was in fact perceived as a form of internal colonization, especially in Telangana, where the best lands were acquired by the settlers. Recently, there was a controversy over a Telugu novel by a Kamma writer, Chandralata, whom I interviewed in Hyderabad, and who told me that her book was mostly autobiographical because she tells the story of her father, who migrated as a farmer from Andhra to Telangana to buy land in the black cotton soil area, which explains the title of her book, which is Regadi Vittulu in Telugu, which means seeds of black soil. Kammas claim that they are expert in the cultivation of this soil, which is very hard to toil, but can be very productive if water is available. And this book was awarded the Best Telugu Novel prize by the Telugu Association of North America, TANA. This prize was contested in Telangana. TANA was accused of caste favoritism because they are the association is dominated by Kammas living in the US. And the novel was criticized for portraying Telangana people as unable to develop their own lands, and for presenting Telangana culture in a negative light as backward. This controversy over the book shows that the regionalist sentiment that led to the creation of a separate Telangana is not only about economic domination by Andhras, but also about cultural domination. For example, many people resent the fact that in the Telugu film industry, which is controlled by the Kammas, the films make fun of the Telangana dialects, which are spoken mostly by the villain, underclass, or criminal characters. So caste dominance can take many different forms. Its nature and degree vary according to the territory observed, whether it's a rural or urban area, whether it's small town or a big city, whether the dominant caste is originally from this place or migrated there. The concept of dominant caste is still relevant in today's India, but one has to take into account new attributes of dominance, which are not only, as I said, related to land ownership, but to culture, ideology via the control of the media, the entertainment industry, and state power. That's why I found the concept of hegemony very useful for my study of Kammas, but it's important to bear in mind that no hegemony can be so pervasive as to eliminate all ground for contestation or resistance. Thank you.
I had a question about hegemony. Normally one understands hegemony to be a process whereby one's particular interests are staged as universal interests. So let's say Kamma culture would be projected as universal culture. And that universal culture would be sort of accepted. That's how I understand sort of Gramsci's discussion of the hegemony achieved by the European bourgeoisie. Now, in the Andhra case, although at the end you did say, qualified your hegemony argument by saying that of course there are, other factors, land ownership and so on and so forth, involved too. But I'm just wondering, the account that you've given of, Kammas as a dominant caste includes in it all the things that we wouldn't normally associate with hegemony understood as a purely kind of cultural process. For example, its stranglehold over Dalit laborers, its control of state power, its use of state power against Maoism. There are many other instances that one could point to and say, to quote Ranajit Guha, it's dominance without hegemony, rather than hegemony. Would you agree?
Shall I answer this first?
You can do whatever you want, I think, and you can say that you need to think about this.
No.
You need to think about this too. So go ahead. I think this is very relevant.
I have discussed Guha's argument in my thesis, and I do argue that it's dominance with hegemony, but not to deny all the material aspect of dominance, which you have said, which is very true. The grip of a Dalit labor, state power, all this is very much there. But on top of that, they managed to spread the ideology they believed in, and under Naidu's regime, one can almost say, as you said, it didn't become universal, but neoliberalism was imposed in the Andhra Pradesh state. But I think hegemony always goes with resistance. That's why I have tried to show. There is never a complete acceptation of the ideology of the ruling class by the subalterns.
No, I don't disagree with resistance, yes. What I'm wondering about just simply whether the Kammas project their ideology as universal, as the ideology of all, Telugu-speaking people.
Oh, they do. When I discuss with them, what they say and the reality are two different things. Like for them, they wouldn't interpret at all the Telangana separatist movement as a contestation of their cultural domination, for example. For them, it's a regionalist, nonsensical movement, because there are a lot of to lose in that. So what they say in their discourses is that obviously, they claim to universality, but it's obviously not the case.
I think we should continue that in a little bit. I want to add something to that, but later on. So let's take Frederic.
Yeah, that actually brought up part of the question that I had, what Jan was saying. And it made me wonder, what exactly is Kamma ideology, if in fact there is a Kamma ideology. But tie in with that, I guess, was my earlier question, which is, he sort of got to it, which is, what is the Kamma level of dominance in these kind of lawless, Maoist areas in northern Andhra, abutting on to Chhattisgarh and such places? Is their presence there actually effective in establishing domination?
Well, when NTR and Chandrababu Naidu were in power, they virtually crushed the Naxalites. So the Kammas of Telangana were affected by the Naxalites, not as Kammas as such, but as landlords, like whether it's Kamma or Reddys or Velamas, like their properties were obviously occupied by the Naxalites. And also they were threatened. As I said, it was more as a class struggle than a struggle against Kammas as a caste. And they really used their state power to get rid of this threat, I mean, in the most ruthless form imaginable.
You talked all along about Kammas, and I want to ask about other castes, in a sense. So, in particular, the Reddys, who have been sort of contesting with the Kammas for a very long period, how have their strategies differed from that of the Kammas? And the second question is, in the beginning, you sort of talked about a bunch of structural factors that allowed the Kammas to emerge into this position of dominance, having to do with the fact that they live in irrigated territory, they had agricultural surpluses, and that sort of led them to invest in transport and blah, blah, blah. You sort of talked about that. So the same structural conditions exist in a whole bunch of other places. For example, Tungabhadra, where the Tanjore in Tamil Nadu and so on. Do you see similar dominant caste actions there too?
Yes, I think I would compare Kammas to other dominant castes of North India, like the Patidas or the Patels, who have been studied by Jan Bremen. I think it's a very similar process of diversification from agriculture to urban activities. And yes, I think the best comparison, if there is a comparison to do, is with the Patels. The Reddys, of course, have a similar trajectory, but I think they were at a disadvantage since their land holdings were concentrated in arid areas, and like the land value in coastal Andhra is 10 times higher than in Telangana. So it makes a huge difference, and that's why they could buy so much land just by selling 1 acre there. They could buy 10 acres there. So I think the starting point was different for Kammas and Reddys, but of course Reddys also could prosper. They migrated also abroad. So there are similarities, but I guess differences as well.
No one else on this side? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Even just taking this a little bit further, I've had some conversations with a few Kammas here recently, and what I got the sense out of them was the Kamma pride that you've been talking about, but also the Hindu pride. And and this I don't know the name of the chief minister who was the actor. I think.
NTR.
Yeah.
NT Ramarao.
From what I've been told, he played the role of Lord Krishna in just about all of the movies. I mean, he has played more Lord Krishna than anybody else alive. So, with that sense, take that this whole process evolving, shall we say, in isolation or by itself. And take that now, Modi, who is also coming from the other side, and he's also talking about Hindu pride, and he's supposedly now going to have this statue built for the world's biggest statue. So where is all of this going? Take us a little further into where has it, we know where it has come from, where is it going?
Yeah, I was interested to see when I was discussing with some Kamma informants whether the Hindutva ideology was there among them. Openly, most of them will claim that they are secular, and even Chandrababu Naidu, for a small time, had an alliance with the BJP, like the TDP and the BJP had an alliance, but then this alliance was broken, and Naidu criticized the BJP for being not secular. Like, he portrays an image of being secular, and most Kammas do the same. But of course, the Hindu identity is still very strong. Even here in the US, one way to express their domination is also through trusts which fund temples. here. So it's a very prestigious position to be the head of that trust and to fund so many temples. So religion really plays a role also in their type of dominance. And I did discuss with some Kamma politicians who were openly, had openly this Hindutva ideology, pro-Modi, pro-Hindu nationalism, and he was saying that Kammas are the Jews of India, like we know how to tackle Muslims and we are the most intelligent, we are a minority but we will dominate the world. This kind of discourse was there, but it's a minority of politicians who were talking like this openly at least.
Yeah. I just have a quick thing to say here. First of all, thank you very much for this wonderfully, this detailed narrative that you gave us here. I was thinking along with Gyan's question that, look, I'm not sure what more the concept of hegemony is bringing to the understanding of this, like, really interesting and pretty feisty kind of caste here. And so that would be, one thing right there. And I'm thinking of the work of Indira Arumugan, also from LSE, who worked on the Kalar caste in Tamil Nadu, whereby she really showed that these Kalar people are, far from being the subaltern that we think of nowadays of them, because they were the so-called criminal caste during the British, are extraordinarily driven by power and by force, and just will do anything to expand and to acquire territory, not unlike the way you describe here. Yes. So she really is talking about just the sheer power. Now I'm not sure whether sheer power is also, any more helpful to help us understand what is going on here. But I think that once again the material that you're presenting here exceed the category hegemony, exceed the category dominance. And I think if there is anything that maybe what Gyan is trying to point out to. And then the second thing is, like, for an anthropologist like myself, there's something a little missing here. I would like to see a little more Weber into this stuff, or into like the interpretation of your data. Because, as Weber has shown us, people who are driven to acquire, to accumulate, they just don't do it for the purpose of greed. They also have some sort of spirit, some sort of cultures and ethos that drive them to do that. And I noticed in your talk that you didn't talk about religion. It doesn't have to be that the spirit is religious all the time, but that you sort of like content yourself to describe certain kind of political denouement, development rather, and certain kind of sociological development, and that you don't really tell us too much about, like, well, what Fred was saying earlier on, the ideology of those folks here, whatever we want to call it. So maybe, you have so much information to digest right now, that it's like I can see why it would take you time to just like get quote unquote the facts straight. But then maybe as you rewrite this dissertation, maybe you want to strive for something that would be just more telling and maybe more peculiar to this Kamma caste, than the concept of hegemony coined by Gramsci, quite in different, places and many, many years ago already. So that would be kind of where my advice would be here. Dr. Gobragada.
Thank you so much for this wonderful account, socio-economic as well as historic, of the entire, almost, it was like hearing about the entire Andhra Pradesh state, right from its inception to, of course, even before its inception. I wanted to hear more about what another gentleman there asked about the Reddys versus the Kammas. What do the Reddys think and feel about the Kamma? Because they both are dominant castes in Andhra Pradesh. So how do they see themselves, the Reddys, vis-a-vis the Kammas? And I was very intrigued to understand that the Tamil Association of North America here, TANA, Telugu Association is more Kamma dominated, and therefore the Ana
Ata,
started,
yeah.
and they are readies because, and when I go, when they invite me, it's, you know, as of course the Telugus of United States, and yeah, so I see them as Telugus, and it's interesting to understand this internal
Yeah.
distribution, you know,
Yeah,
genesis.
all these are hidden politics, but they are quite open about it. In fact,
Mhm.
once they start
Yeah,
telling you
but not to
information,
the consulate visa, you know,
Yeah, of
because
course.
we represent the government of India, so they present this
Yes,
Telugu
yes.
race to us.
I didn't really ask Reddis about their perception of Kammas, but what I did is ask Dalits the different, how they see the difference of oppression from Kammas and from Reddis. So what they say is that Reddy kind of oppression is much more feudal, in the sense that there were the big landlords, like they called Doras in Telangana. So it was a kind of feudal exploitation. But in coastal Andhra, it's a purely capitalist kind of exploitation, like low wages and like profit accumulation on labor. In Telangana, the Dalits had to do all kind of free service to serve the master. I mean, really kind what you imagine when you think of feudal relations in agriculture. So that was the main difference, but I can't say which one is more oppressive, in fact.
Well, thank you very much for this great talk.